Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time we have a question from a psychedelic dude who asked, "Hey Thor, you have talked a lot about what Jedi aren't or shouldn't be. Can you tell us what you think a Jedi is and should be? Maybe go through some scenarios, some from the movies or maybe some made up ones. What would an ideal Jedi do in these situations? WWJD, what would a Jedi do?" Okay, so I'm probably going to get a little off topic on this one at points, but first of all, George Lucas has always essentially described the Jedi as either like marshals from the Old West who seek to keep the peace, or, and more often, as warrior monks who go around the galaxy trying to settle disputes and seeking to do it as peacefully as possible. They never want to fight or resort to violence, but they're certainly not afraid to do it when they have to, when they're left with no other options. He has even described them as mafia dons, of all things, that will basically sit two sides of a dispute down and, no pun intended, they will force them to come to an agreement.
I knew it. They're here to force a settlement.
He's also said in the book, The Star Wars Archives, 1999 to 2005, that the Jedi don't like to fight or kill people. They're monk warriors. They're monks first, and they try to convince people to get along, and if you don't comply, your hands come off. They use their power to keep the governments of all the planets in line so that they don't do terrible things. He was then asked after saying this, and they have the moral authority for that. To which George Lucas responded, "Yeah, they are the most moral of anybody in the galaxy. They're monks." And not to get too into it here or too far off topic already, but the problem the Jedi run into in the prequels is that they get caught up in a war, which is something they are not supposed to do. Of that, George Lucas has even said, "A lot of people say, what good is a lightsaber against a tank? The Jedi weren't meant to fight wars." That's the big issue in the prequels. They got drafted into service, which is exactly what Palpatine wanted. He has also said of that, "The Jedi are always sort of fighting this reality of the fact that they're, in essence, diplomats. They sort of persuade people to do the right thing, but their job really isn't to go around fighting people. Yet they're now used as generals and they're fighting in a war. And they're doing something that they really weren't meant to do. They're being corrupted by this war, by being forced to be generals instead of peacemakers." And I do find it rather interesting that he says they're being corrupted by the war, when many seem to believe that them having been corrupted already, or them, or the Order itself, or the Jedi way, having some sort of inherent flaw is what led to their demise. In other words, and if you have read a lot of what Lucas has said about the Jedi, you'll see or hear this from him, or maybe I should say won't see or hear this from him. But I don't think Lucas saw anything all too wrong with the Jedi before or at the start of the prequels. I don't think he saw the Order as flawed or failing, and then Palpatine came in and took advantage of that. I don't think, despite what many believe, he sang or has ever implied in anything I have ever read, which is a lot of George Lucas quotes and a lot of books that talk about what he has said. But I don't think he has ever implied that there was either some kind of big event that sent them down the wrong road or track, if you will. That was the problem. They had this big issue and they never resolved it, and then Palpatine comes in and uses that to destroy them. Nor has he ever said there is any kind of slow or steady downfall of some kind that led to what happened in the prequels, led to their destruction. Though, yes, even I have argued before that there was probably something wrong with them. Maybe, or almost certainly not something massively wrong, but I'd have to believe there was some type of small little crack in the armor, if you will, that opened the door for Palpatine and his eventual victory, which I think is, as even basically said by Yoda in Episode 2, or Attack of the Clones, that they have become too sure of themselves.
Too sure of themselves they are. Even the older, more experienced ones.
And considering one of the main themes of the prequels is always remaining vigilant or evil can and will return, and maybe even be welcomed back with thunderous applause.
It's ultimately a discussion about how fragile democracy is, and how democracies sometimes get turned over to tyrants. with applause, and that we should always be vigilant as citizens to make sure that doesn't happen.
I do feel like it wasn't a major flaw that Palpatine took advantage of, but it was a little bit of overconfidence that did the Jedi in against one of the most intelligent and powerful Sith ever. Well, that and the dark side was rising or becoming more powerful at this time, with Lucas even saying of it, or of the Jedi at the time, that it's not that they can't see the dark side coming, it's just that the dark side begins to envelop everything. It's like walking into a fog. The Jedi's ability to see lessens as the dark side grows. In other words, the bad guys, the Sith, are primarily at fault for what happens in the sequels. They win, basically. Palpatine manipulating Anakin, manipulating the Chosen One who was supposed to destroy the Sith, is why they win. It's not that the Jedi Order was overly or inherently flawed, it's that the Sith win because the Jedi were a little too sure of themselves. And as kind of predicted, I have kind of got off track, but I did have a point with all that, which was to say that I don't think the Jedi we see in the prequels, or at the start of them before the Clone Wars, is all that far off from what they're supposed to be in the mind of George Lucas. Again, many people think in those films we're seeing an order that has become very flawed over time, or has always had big flaws, but I think we're simply seeing one that has become a bit too detached or aloof. One that's a bit too dogmatic, perhaps. That's more about following the rules of the Jedi Code.
The code forbids it.
And following the will of the Senate over doing what feels right. And those feelings they get are the will of the Force, or so I believe. As I've argued before, I don't think the Force literally talks to the Jedi through the midichlorians. It doesn't speak to them in words. I think the reason why Jedi are supposed to feel and not think, or to trust their instincts,
Feel. Don't think. Use your instincts.
Is because that is how you truly follow the will of the Force. That gut feeling you get is more than just a gut feeling when you're a Jedi. It's the Force trying to guide you where you're needed, or telling you what to do. And so what I think Qui-Gon Jinn is supposed to represent, why the Force guides him of all Jedi to Anakin, to the Chosen One who will stop the rising dark side, is because Qui-Gon, he will go and mediate disputes for the Republic, like Lucas says the Jedi do. That is how it all starts, after all. But he's still tuned into the Force above anything and everything else. He will still let it guide him. Its will guide him over the will of the Senate. He still knows and believes that the Force knows best, if you will. And I really do think, according to Lucas, that Qui-Gon is meant to represent the sort of ideal Jedi, or very, very close to it. Because I do think, and this isn't coming from Lucas, but you did ask what I think a Jedi should be, but I do think, and I'm not so sure Lucas would entirely disagree with me or anything like that, but I think the Jedi in their, shall we say, purest form, are simply individuals that are only loosely held together by some sort of order. And it is far more about, again, individuals going around the galaxy, going wherever they feel they're supposed to go, led by the will of the Force, and helping however they can and to help keep the balance. And as I've said before, balance in Star Wars is not anywhere near as complicated as some people want to make it out to be. It is not about some perfect blend of the dark side and the light side, or embracing a little bit of both. It is simply people rejecting being overly selfish.
When you go to the dark side, is it goes out of balance, and then you get really selfish and you forget about everybody, and you ultimately lead yourself, because when you get selfish, you get stuff, or you want stuff. Mm-hmm. And when you want stuff and you get stuff, then you are afraid somebody's going to take it away from you.
And as Lucas has also said, people in the Star Wars galaxy, they do have destinies if they want to follow it, because they also have free will to find their own way.
And all living things around us flows from us. Controls individuals, yet we have free will. We have a destiny if we want to follow it. We live for a reason and must discover what it is.
But what the Sith do, what greedy people do, is, in a way, they deny you that free will. They deny you choices. They deny you the chance to find that destiny or to make your own path in the world, because they take everything, which leads to them kind of controlling everything. And so, speaking of destinies, I think every so often a Jedi who is out there roaming the galaxy, who is just letting the will of the Force guide them to where they are needed, I think every so often they will come across a child strong with the Force, one who is meant to be a Jedi, which is why they're strong with the Force in the first place, because it's their destiny to do something with that power. They will then take on this child as a Padawan to keep the Jedi way going, and that is simply how it works. I really do think the Jedi are just supposed to roam the galaxy, led by the Force, helping people win and where they can, helping keep the balance. And sure, maybe they are loosely held together by an order that the Republic can call upon at times for help with disputes and the like.
What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?
But I don't think there's supposed to be anything more than that, really. I don't think there's supposed to be a very rigid order with all of these rules that sometimes, as we see in the prequels, conflict with what the Force seems to want, and then also opens them to be drafted as generals in a war. And as for what would Jedi do scenarios, how do I think they'd handle certain situations? Well, I don't know. I think if I was going to do something like that, other people should come up with the situations, and we can all discuss what we think the Jedi would do in those scenarios. That could potentially be something fun for a future video. But for now, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think the Jedi are supposed to be. What do they ideally look like to you? Or you can always ask or re-ask a question for a future lightning response video. I have been getting tons and tons of questions lately, and again, thank you so much for that. Or I guess you could also suggest a difficult scenario for the Jedi to have to solve. Either way, whatever you want to do, start your comment off with "Hey Thor" and then ask away. So again, leave those comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.